In today's video, we have the latest on Jakob Chychrun. More information from TSN's Insider Trading on the trade talks heating up around the young defenseman looking to make a move. We also have some updates out of Ottawa and Florida in regards to some trade talk. We also have a lot of players on waivers today as rosters are cut in training camp. Lots of other news, including some injuries as well, and some more updates from around the league. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a ton of news today, a lot of different items from around the NHL, so let's jump right in and get started. First up from the league, we have confirmation that the Czech government, who is going to be hosting the Sharks and Predators series coming over there in not too distant future. Of course, they had made a statement before saying that they were not going to allow any Russian players to come and enter the country and to play hockey, and that has been resolved. So I'm not sure exactly how things were resolved, but at the end of the day, that's not too important. The main thing is that the Sharks and the Predators, who both have at least one Russian player on each team, I believe the Sharks have multiple, they're not going to have any issues and they can go as a team. Of course, GM Mike Greer of the Sharks had made a statement saying that either they go as a team or they don't go at all, which I completely understand. I do understand that the original sentiment from the Czech government. I understand their issue with Russia as a country, considering what's going on in that part of the world right now. But at the same time, I don't think it's fair that these players kind of get singled out and not be allowed to be there when they don't really have anything to do with the conflict. So obviously nice to hear that that situation has been resolved. There won't be any issues. The Vancouver Canucks, of course, had another injury scare with forward Ilya Mikeyev. Of course, coming on a fairly lucrative UFA contract. He went out with an injury, and there was concerns, according to Frank Saravalli, that he may have had a torn ACL. However, those concerns seem to have dissipated. It looks like he's been having a little bit of luck that it wasn't as bad as they originally had feared. I believe he's got multiple opinions, and there is word that he should resume skating here sometime in the next couple of days. I've seen some reporters say within a day or two, but I heard Bruce Boudreau, the head coach of the Canucks, who would likely know better than just about anybody, say that it will likely be sometime next week. A few other notes around injuries. The New Jersey Devils captain Nico Hischier is battling an injury. He's having an issue with a hamstring, and he's expected to miss approximately 10 days. So if all goes well, he should be ready to go for opening night. Of course, that's unfortunate, though, that he'll be missing a chunk of training camp that'll kind of get him towards the end of things here. Hopefully that doesn't slow down him being prepared to start the NHL season, because that wouldn't be good. Ducks young forward and up-and-coming superstar Trevor Zegras, looks like he might be out for a period of time. We don't really know. I haven't seen any updates on Zegras today, but I know last night when they had a preseason game against the Arizona Coyotes, he took a massive open ice hit from Coyotes forward Galchenyuk. To me, there was nothing wrong with the hit per se. It was definitely clean. I just don't know that they really need to have that kind of activity in a preseason game. I understand things are looked upon very differently depending on what your status is in the NHL when it comes to preseason games. If you're already established enough and you know you've got a roster spot, you're kind of just going through the motions, play a little bit to kind of get the rust off and get ready. Whereas if you're a young up-and-coming player, you're looking to make a name for yourself and looking to make yourself a roster spot in the NHL. And sometimes you get players that are, playing a little harder than others, you could say. So I don't really have a problem with the hit. I just hate to see this kind of stuff in preseason action. And to me, I think that this year especially, they're playing way too many preseason games. I know some teams are playing as many as 8. I think that's way too much. I understand they're probably trying to make up for lost time because of the pandemic, so they're probably trying to get some extra games in, but I still think it's too high risk. It's too much for the players. Creates too many situations for injuries, because with each preseason game, they are obligated to have a certain number of established veteran players in the lineup to kind of make sure that it's worth it for the fans paying for tickets, that they're not basically seeing a farm team or a rookie team on the ice, right? You want to see a mixture of the up-and-coming players mixed in with the vets and, whatnot. So we'll see what happens, but I doubt there'll be any changes from that. But Trevor Zegras did leave the ice, and I wouldn't doubt if he might possibly have a concussion, although I haven't seen confirmation from the Ducks organization on that, so we'll have to wait and see. But certainly a bit of a scary situation for Anaheim in that regard. A couple of updates when it comes to some PTOs. The Colorado Avalanche head coach Jared Bednar made comments on the PTO release of Alex Galchenyuk. Of course, we know he went there on a PTO and was already released the other day. Basically, he said that Galchenyuk had gotten hurt and that he was going to have to miss significant time, which is why they decided to release him from the PTO. They said up until the point that he got hurt, they were actually impressed with his play and what he was up to. So it wasn't completely play and performance related. But he said once they determined that he was going to need a significant time, which I don't really know the extent of it, of course, to recover, that it just didn't make sense to keep him on the PTO and that they needed to move on. So we'll see. I don't know if Galchenyuk will get another shot or not, but at least we have a little bit more context as to why that decision was made quicker than we expected. But another player has been released from PTO, actually two of them. The Philadelphia Flyers have released forward Antoine Roussel from his PTO. I thought maybe he'd have a chance, but of course with the signing of Nick Delorier on a longer term, more lucrative deal, I was a little confused as to why they bring in Roussel as well. But like I said, another veteran player who they know is going to work hard. Really not bad to have around for training camp to push some other players. So that's obviously what happened, and contract's not going to come from it for him. And goaltender Christopher Gibson, who was in camp with the Coyotes, has also been released as well. So we don't usually see too many PTOs turn into contracts every year. There's generally, sometimes there's a few, but the percentage is actually quite low. But today's also the first day of waivers for when it comes to regular season rosters. So a lot of players on waivers today. We actually have a grand total of 13. Teams are making more and more larger cuts, sending players to either back to junior, back to some European clubs in some cases, or of course they want to send them to their minor league affiliates. And of course, many players need waivers. They've been in the league long enough that they can't just be assigned to the minors. So 13 players today include Arizona's John Sebastian Day and Michael Carcioni. The Los Angeles Kings have Austin Wagner on waivers. The New York Islanders have forward Richard Panik, who I don't believe was even at training camp. I think his intent, or their intent with him, was to have him start when their American Hockey League affiliate camp opened up. But I'm not sure. But I know when they released their original camp roster, he was not on it. Ken Appleby, also at the Islanders, has been put through waivers, all of course for the purpose of being assigned to the minors. The Avalanche have a bunch. Colorado has sent Charles Hudon, Spencer Smallman, Jonas Johansson, Andreas Englund, Joshua Jacobs, and defenseman Bradley Hunt, all on waivers today. CJ Smith and Turner Elson from the New York Rangers also on waivers. So grand total of 13. I don't think too many of these guys really have any much of a chance of getting picked up. I would maybe say Brad Hunt in Colorado might be the best one. He's, to me, actually a very underrated defenseman. He seems to do relatively well wherever he goes. Did well in Vancouver. I believe he was in Minnesota for a while. Like, he just kind of flies under the radar. You don't hear a lot about him, but to me, he's just one of those guys who I'm surprised hasn't been able to nail down a regular job, or at least a number 6-7 spot. But maybe him. I don't think anybody else would be picked up, but we'll find out at noon Eastern time tomorrow when the waiver wire is updated, and we'll see if there's additional players on waivers, which wouldn't be a surprise. The waiver wire, like I mentioned a few days back, was going to start to get busy as training camp rosters are slowly cut down here over the course of, starting today, over the course of the next week or so. So stay tuned. We'll probably be talking about waivers quite a lot here in the coming days. Now, on to some trade talk of the day. Of course, we got an updated version of TSN Insider Trading just a short time ago here on Thursday evening. They had some latest updates on the Jacob Chychrun situation with the Arizona Coyotes. Darren Dreger was talking about the fact that talks do seem to be kind of intensifying a little bit around the defenseman. Of course, he's battled 2 surgeries this offseason, having some bone spurs removed from his ankle, and he had a procedure on his wrist. So he's getting ready to get going here for his season. So as he gets healthy, interest is picking up as we inch closer to the NHL regular season getting underway. Of course, we've heard a lot about Ottawa and St. Louis. Mostly the Senators, a little bit about St. Louis recently, kind of being in the heavier interested teams. Darren Dreger did list other teams, some of which make sense to me and some don't. So this is Darren Dreger's report, not mine, but Dreger is saying that teams like the Oilers, the Leafs, the Los Angeles Kings, along with Ottawa and St. Louis, and he said many others. I do think Chychrun's a player that would intrigue a lot of teams, but there's really, to be honest, I don't know that there's really that many teams that are all that serious. I think teams like Toronto, Edmonton, and even to a degree LA, I think the cap situation to kind of jump through the cap hurdles to make it work would be complicated, but teams like Ottawa does have enough space. That's why it makes a lot of sense for them. And honestly, based on everything we've heard, I think it's the player's preference, and I know he doesn't have the final say here, but I think it would be his preference to go to Ottawa if he had to pick. So there is a family connection there, and I know based on what I've heard from some local Ottawa people that are well connected, that it seems like that would be the preferred destination. But like I said, it's not entirely up to Chychrun. It's between the Coyotes and whoever they decide to trade his rights to. But obviously, he wants out. That's made it known. We heard the comments that he made earlier in training camp that originally it was the Coyotes' idea to trade him, but once he kind of got used to the idea and decided that he didn't really want to be part of this long drawn out rebuild, that he would like to move on and have a chance to be in a more competitive situation and actually have a chance to play some playoff hockey. Obviously things have intensified a bit. Zegras also goes on to say that there is some belief that the Coyotes have softened their requirements to make the trade a little bit, although he said essentially that they're maybe a little bit more willing than before to take on a contract or two as part of a trade to make this happen. But of course, you're going to have to include, he said, a first-round pick as well as a young prospect and maybe something else. So it's still not drastically different than we've heard before. Like I mentioned, I don't really see them getting 2 first-round picks and a prospect that's close to a recent equivalent of a first rounder. I don't see them getting that. As much as Chychrun's a good defenseman, he's battled a lot of injuries. Yes, the contract he's connected to right now is favorable, especially if he can stay healthy and produce anything like he did 2 seasons back, then it would be a steal. But at the same time, that giving up the equivalent of 3 first rounders is a huge chance and risk for a lot of teams. And like as I also mentioned a few days ago, there are some teams out there that are kind of believed to be a little skeptical, little gun shy, you could say, to make the trade and pull the trigger here. That because of the Ryan Ellis situation in Philly, like look what happened there. I mean, not exactly the same scenario, but you'd hate to give up 3 quality assets only to have him continuously be injured and hardly ever play for you, right? So there is that concern, and I do think that's a real valid, legit concern. So we'll see. Even though Zegras listed off all these teams, I don't know. I still think Ottawa's the prime landing spot if it's going to happen. I know Andy Strickland, who works for Valley Sports in the Midwest, but mostly seems to be most connected to the St. Louis Blues. He doesn't think that the Blues' interest is super serious. I think there was some, because Scott Marinovich in Blues training camp ended up getting hurt, that might have maybe increased their more likelihood to maybe try to add some more depth on the back end with his injury. But at the same time, not sure that they would go as big as Chychrun. I do think there is some degree there that it would make sense under the right situation. But at the same time, I don't know that I think they'd have a harder time pulling off a trade, getting through the cap hurdles, and I don't know that they'd have exactly what Arizona wants. I mean, Ottawa's loaded with top young players, and they have lots of draft picks. So to me, they'd have the easier time out of most of these to pull it off. And really, if you want to talk about Ottawa, which we're going to do anyways today, really, like a couple of defensemen on the Senators roster have been in the rumor mill, and according to recent Ottawa local media, including Bruce Garriock, who works for the Ottawa Sun and TSN, some of his latest articles suggest that they're certainly trying to move Nikita Zaitsev. He's not really impressed in training camp, and as we get closer to the regular season getting underway, it really seems like Nikita Zaitsev will not be in the top 6 defense group for the Ottawa Senators to open the season. Of course, he has 2 years left, though, on his contract. Not the greatest, most favorable deal by any means, and certainly they'd like to move that contract. It's been linked to the Coyotes as part of a Chychrun trade for some time. There are some other teams out there who could take that contract on, of course, for the right sweetener, but it's difficult to say what they would do if it doesn't go down in a Chychrun trade. But another defenseman with the Senators whose future is being questioned right now is young defenseman Erik Brannstrom. He certainly had his moments in training camp in some of the preseason action where he's looked pretty good, but he's also had his moments where he has not, and a lot of it I think just boils down to the fact that where he is a smaller defenseman. Not to say that the small guys can't play and be successful, because we know that they can. We've seen it enough times, but they have to be dynamic enough to play top 4 minutes and be in the right situations. And they also have to be strong enough that they can kind of not necessarily have to be, like their smaller frames aren't such a problem for them. But Brandstrom just gets moved off the puck a little bit too easily at times. And that's certainly an issue in the defensive end that we've seen some of the breakdowns so far in this early in the preseason. Of course, he was a centerpiece in the Mark Stone trade, so I think the fan base wants him to succeed. Everybody's rooting for him. I think the organization is reluctant to move him because of what he's connected to, but I'm not convinced right now, at least, that he will be in the top 6 group of the defensemen either, because some of the young defensemen coming up and kind of pushing for a spot. Now, it may end up being that because of the waiver requirements, because Brandstrom would need waivers to go to the minors, so I don't think that's going to happen. They're not going to put him on waivers and risk losing him, but I'm not convinced either that he's a regular, everyday player. He might end up being their number 7 defenseman if he is not involved in a trade for an upgrade. As much as Erik Brandstrom has a lot of upside in some respects, there's also a lot of flaws too, and it's difficult to say if that relationship is really going to work out right now. I mean, they obviously have Thomas Chabot, they have a guy like Jacob Bernard Docker and Lassie Thompson pushing to make NHL roster, and to me, right now, Bernard Docker looks like he might be ready, which could possibly push Brandstrom out of the top 6. So we'll see what happens. I don't want to say that the Senators are going to trade Brandstrom, but I know as they get ready to start the regular season with what they've seen in training camp, it certainly appears like what the local media is saying, that guys like Zaitsev and Brandstrom might be on the outside looking in and very well could be involved in a deal if they can find ways to upgrade. So we'll have to watch them. I do think the summer of Pierre Dorion might be over, but as the move's done, I think he may still have another move up his sleeve to improve that Senators team either before or early in the NHL season. Now, there's also some talk in Florida around the future of Sergei Bobrovsky. Pierre LeBrun was reporting on this on Insider Trading earlier tonight on TSN, and I'm not the first person I've seen talk about this. I've seen a few other articles as well. Ever since the Spencer Knight contract was announced, there's a lot of people wondering, what does this mean for Bobrovsky? Between Sergei Bobrovsky and Spencer Knight, because Knight signed a 3-year extension, so their contracts are now set to expire at the exact same time. Of course, Bobrovsky has 4 years left on that 7-year deal, counting the current season that's coming up. So after this year, he's got 3 years left. Well, of course, Knight signed a 3-year extension as well, so that's the expirations match. But of course, that also makes $14.5 million tied up in goaltending, which is a lot of money. But Bobrovsky has a full no-move clause, so there's some questioning, well, because of the Knight contract, can they really afford to have that much money tied up in goaltending? The answer is probably not, but they may not have a choice. And there's a lot of people wondering, are they going to try to get out of the Bobrovsky contract? Could they trade it? And to be honest, I don't know. I think they might have to go with it for at least one season. Otherwise, they may have to consider a buyout, but a buyout would still be fairly expensive. The final 3 years of that contract, if they bought it out, for the first 3 years, they'd save $3.3 million per year. Then they'd have 3 years of dead space. I think it was around 1.6 or something like that it would work out to. So they would save money, but it would still be an expensive buyout, and they'd be connected to that contract for an extra 3 years with some dead space. I don't know. And in a trade, I mean, Bobrovsky's got a full no move. I mean, I think time will tell here. Obviously, it's going to depend a lot on his play. But signing Knight to that contract certainly raised some eyebrows and wondering if that could mean that they're going to try to find a way to get out of Bobrovsky's deal. But LeBrun was reporting a lot of the reasoning why they did that now as well is because, according to what he's been told, Panthers management was seriously concerned over potential Spencer Knight offer sheet next season. If they get through the year and he becomes an RFA next summer, they know their cap situation is tight, especially with the Bobrovsky contract already on the books for another 3 more years after this one, and that they were legit concerned over an offer sheet, so they want to get ahead of it and make sure that didn't happen. So they may have to make some other moves and live with this expensive goaltending for a few years, but I think I'd be surprised, to be honest, if Bobrovsky does finish the contract in Florida, but I think he's going to have to do at least those 3 years when they're lined up, at least one of them for sure. and then maybe a buyout. I'd be shocked if we've seen a trade just given the Mammoth contract and the fact that he has full control, and I doubt he'd want to leave. But let me know what your thoughts. Are the Panthers going to try to move on from Bobrovsky? Do you think it's even possible? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and we'll talk about it further. If you're new to this channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.